Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 25th of July, 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Derrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we are delighted to be joined today by a live video Skype link by Mark Anderson from American Free Press. And of course, Mark also runs the Truth Hound blog spot with much interesting news. Where do we start?
We're starting with Brexit, Brian, and we're going to break the rules by actually praising a mainstream article.
Okay.
Can you believe that?
I'll brace myself.
Okay, this is Prospect magazine, and the headline is, "It's not just Euratom. Leaving the EU will be complicated by all sorts of regulations." And this is by Kenneth Armstrong. He says, "The structure for European cooperation on nuclear issues recently became headline news. It's far from the only factor that will complicate Brexit." We mentioned this at the time, but he says awareness has been growing that the really difficult part of Brexit is how to manage the UK's departure from all the institutions, agencies and networks of administrators that make the EU's rulebook work. Although it has been clear for some time that the UK intends to replicate existing EU rules and regulations in domestic law, the aim of the repeal bill, it was never going to be enough to simply reproduce the EU rules in UK law. Rules need structures and systems to operate properly, especially when these rules are intended to work across borders. That's where problems might emerge. He then goes on to give some examples of the types of situations, types of institutions that have to be, the new agreements have to be made to replace. And he ends the article by saying, "Brexit, interestingly, looks like a decision to demolish a house, only then to spend millions of pounds rebuilding it to look the same as it did before." And frankly, Brian, that is bang on the money.
Yep, hits the nail on the head, exactly. So we've got the bluster of Brexit, which is not happening at all. It's just being remodelled, and then it's going to be presented back to the public as if something's changed, but actually nothing will have changed.
Absolutely. And if anybody wants to know, I'm going to mention this again, anybody wants to know what it's going to look like, you need to read this document, which is the document that David Cameron published in, I think, February 2016, "The Best of Both Worlds, the United Kingdom's Special Status in a Reformed European Union." This is the policy that Theresa May is heading towards. This is what she's working towards. So if you want to understand where they're going, you need to have a look at that one.
So we could sort of surmise here a bit, we could guess a bit, and we could say that they were so worried about the vote over leaving the European Union, the fact they could lose that vote. I don't think they expected to lose it by the margin they did, but they were worried enough that they'd already planned the measures that they would put in place should the worst case happen and that leave vote happen.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest,
preordained. To
be honest, I don't think the referendum result makes or made one jot of difference to what their intentions were.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the meantime, of course, if you read that Best of Both Worlds document, you discover that right at the heart of British policy is global trade. Well, Liam Fox was in the United States yesterday meeting Mr. Pence and promoting #Global Britain, because, of course, that is the mantra that Theresa May is operating by at the moment. This was during his US visit for the first meeting of the UK-US Trade and Investment Working Group. Well, what did he say? He said, we will do so. He was talking about trade, because he's saying that Britain is a proud champion in the cause of global free trade, unashamedly promoting the importance of the rules-based system and helping it ensure that the proceeds of prosperity are distributed to all. And of course, what he's reflecting there is the fact that they're worried that globalization is relatively unpopular these days because some people have been left behind. They can't have people being left behind, so they're going to try to adjust the system to make it palatable to more people. This is a global responsibility, he says, not one that Britain can realise alone. He says, we'll also set our sights wider, strengthening our ties with new friends and old allies alike, as we seek to build a truly global Britain. As Adam Smith famously observed, free trade appeals not to one's benevolence, but to the idea that prosperity is achieved when we are at liberty to pursue our own interests. In other words, when we're at liberty to crush everyone and everyone else.
When we're at liberty to get rich, that's the goal, is to get rich, and we're going to ditch benevolence in the sideline. So I think I think this statement covers the objective extremely well.
So I'll bring Mark Anderson at this point in. Mark, over the last couple of years, you and I have been discussing global free trade and the implications of it, particularly in the context of the major free trade deals that they were trying to do, the TPP, the TTIP, TISA, and so on. What the point I'm really making here is that this global trade policy is right at the heart of everything they're doing. It hasn't gone away, and although TPP and TTIP appear to be dead, they've simply reoriented slightly, and they're pushing the same policy through another form of wolf in sheep's clothing obfuscation.
Indeed. Free trade is a philosophy more than anything, Mike and Brian. So whatever label you put on it, TPP, TTIP, doesn't matter so much. NAFTA, they're trying to rework, they say, the North American Free Trade Agreement between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. But the whole free trade thing is based partly on the fact that they keep the money supply short in all the different countries. There's basically a money drought. And so we're all forced to export goods in search of more purses and wallets in other countries to make up for the purchasing power shortfall in each country. So each nation is trying to run a trade surplus, but for some to run a surplus, others must run a deficit. Not all boats can float at the same time. So there's inequities right away. And that's just the beginning of the problems. And then you have all this treachery. I call it mayhem, named after Theresa May, mayhem. And they have us dancing all over the place thinking that free trade is dead if the U.S. pulls out of the TPP, or if TTIP seems stuck in neutral, that free trade is dead. They can just rework these deals and keep that free trade philosophy alive, where they have, banking, currency exchanges as the goods cross the oceans, currency conversions from one kind to another, the merchant bankers and the investment bankers making huge profits off of that, countries that could become self-sufficient, grow a lot of things that they should consume themselves, but end up exporting them, like Japan exporting a lot of rice when it should consume its own rice. And it leads to a degraded food supply if you're talking about perishables, less nutritious, less healthy food. And it's just a huge racketeering scheme, a huge racket across the world that would be really arrested and solved if we had better purchasing power in each country, if we had something like the Bradbury pound and interest-free currency entering the economy, being spent into existence rather than loaned into existence, and each country could purchase most of its own production and become more self-sufficient on the national and local level. And then you would have a much more rational world where each country could feed itself to the furthest extent practicable. Yeah. And this whole garish, nasty business could be put aside and really put out of our misery, you might say.
Absolutely. Well, let's just look at how the BBC viewed Liam Fox's trip to the United States. Liam Fox downplays UK-US chlorinated chicken differences. So there you go. We're not going to worry about free trade, Brian, and the implications of the types of free, because of course what we're talking about is the type of free trade that's on offer here, and you know, there are many concerns expressed about TPP and TTIP. The fundamental principles upon which those trade deals were based are the same fundamental principles that Liam Fox's trade deals are going to be based, but the BBC prefers to worry about chickens.
Well, can I add a bit more in there? Because, of course, if the BBC is worried about chickens, the BBC has forgotten the original scandal around Liam Fox over a gentleman called Adam Verity, who he was using as a personal assistant. The man was not a bona fide government employee, and yet Fox was taking that young man to all sorts of conferences and government business where he was being presented as if he was security cleared to to allow him to enter the discussions. So once again, we're seeing senior British politicians up to wheeling and dealing outside of the law, and he got away with that. We can remember that he was connected to Atlantic Bridge, and if we follow Atlantic Bridge through, that was a charity. Ultimately, I think it was closed due to its political activities, but we had John Falk as one of the people involved with that, and you follow his background, you get through to Blackwater, now Z as it's known, I believe. So we've got Fox mixing with very, very dubious characters on the world stage, and Craig Murray, former Foreign Office diplomat to Uzbekistan, said that it was a well-known discussion at that time inside Westminster as to whether Adam Werity was actually being controlled by the CIA or Mossad. So Fox, who is he? He's supposedly just a politician, but I think there's something a lot darker and deeper.
Indeed. Now, yesterday we mentioned the continuing Russiagate scandal and the Chuck Grassley Senate Judiciary Committee meetings. Now, these meetings that are taking place today and tomorrow are yesterday and today rather are in secret, or in camera at least, and tomorrow is a public hearing. But already the mainstream media spinning this somewhat. So the headline in the Independent here: Jared Kushner's Russia meeting statement leaves Donald Trump Jr. badly exposed, and they're saying that he is set to testify before the Senate Intelligence Committee, this morning. And what's striking about his extensive opening statement is the degree to which he seeks to insulate himself from any culpability or responsibility, primarily regarding the known facts that concern Donald Trump Jr. And so he's basically saying that when he got to the alleged meeting, the person who's since been identified as a Russian attorney was talking about the issue of a ban on US adoptions of Russian children. He said, "I had no idea why that topic was being raised and quickly determined that my time was not well spent at that meeting. Reviewing emails confirmed his memory that the meeting was a waste of our time, and that in looking for a polite way to leave and get back to his work, he actually emailed an assistant from the meeting after he had been there for 10 minutes or so and wrote, 'Can you please call me on my cell? Need an excuse to get out of this meeting.'" So he's really making the point here that it wasn't a meeting that he was particularly interested in. But Mark, what is Jared Kushner, and how do you see this whole thing playing out? Is there, we have discussed this at length on this news program, that there is nothing here, but the mainstream media is flogging this dead horse as hard as they can. What do you see coming out of this at the end?
It's difficult to say with absolute precision, but Kushner to me looks like someone that you could just about say is subversive of the Trump presidency. Yes, he's the son-in-law of Donald Trump, but he even had a very strong hand in naming who would replace Sean Spicer as the press representative at the press conferences in the White House press secretary under Donald Trump. And that's a businessman that they hired, another investment guru who's in the Trump administration, who's now replacing Sean Spicer. And that's a little bit discomforting, a little unsettling in and of itself. But Kushner had a very strong hand in that. He had a very strong hand in pushing Steve Bannon to the margins in terms of Trump's advisory people. And Bannon is a known nationalist, although he's got a little bit of a spotty philosophy and record. He is more of an America firster. Kushner is an internationalist. He's got this pro-Zionist mindset. It's sort of controversial to say, but he's been tight with the Chabad Lubavitch, one of the most radical sects of Zionism. And they are also in tight with Alan Dershowitz, the well-known far left-wing lawyer. And that sect of the Zionist power structure, the Lubavitchers as they're known, kind of an obscure group in some quarters, they're very tight with Kushner. Kushner spent many years in college with that Zionist sect and is very much of that pro-Zionist philosophy. to put really Israel first, not America, in terms of foreign policy. This is just the background of Kushner that's not often discussed, even in alternative media. Excuse me. So Kushner's a very, in my opinion, unpredictable and untrustworthy character, and this does prove why having too much nepotism in high office, too much family, can become a problem, and that's why, of course, it's frowned upon to have too many kin, too much family within one orbit, in an important public office.
But Mark, this goes. I mean, Trump's problems within his own administration go way beyond Kushner, because actually it's very hard to look in at the White House at the moment and sort of identify anybody that's really on the same page as anybody else.
Well, that's true. Of course, some of that is the media making it look like it's more confused than it really is. Time magazine put out a magazine cover where it shows Trump leaning against the Washington Monument on his phone on Twitter, and the Washington Monument is becoming kind of fragmented, and it's saying that Trump is attacking government, when in fact it's the media attacking the Trump government. Trump is not so much the enemy of the state as is the media trying to make it look like Trump is the enemy of the state. There are problems in both realms, yes. But I focused on Kushner because he, singularly, he is a real troublemaker, really undermining the Trump America First mission to create so much confusion that it's hard for Trump to get his domestic agenda clarified and carried out. His Buy American summit that he just had, where he had a lot of American products showcased around the White House, was again overlooked and obscured by media obsession on the Russian connection, of which Kushner is a major player. But yeah, with Sean Spicer having left and the whole 9 yards, it very much looks very confusing, like total chaos. But I think that's at least mostly a media contrivance, or at least an exaggeration.
Yeah. Now, related to this, of course, the question is who is driving all this Russia phobia, and you discovered this news brief from the Trilateral Commission, which is an update on a 2014 briefing, actually, and I think they published this about a year ago. But it perhaps puts a little bit of context on what we're seeing in the media.
Oh, absolutely. This is the thing that we have always reported on my end and on your end as we work together on the alternative news, is that, the real thinking and the real long-range planning and manipulation comes from groups like the Trilateral Commission and Bilderberg and the Atlantic Council and Chatham House, where the government people that we talk about and the business people and the bankers and the think tankers all converge to strategize. And I was at the April 2014 Trilateral Commission meeting, and I'll just say came across, I won't go into details, I came across the study at that meeting and was able to get some information. But then this latest one, that's an update of the 2014 report on Russia, it basically fleshes out, and people can read this at my Steemit blog, steemit.com, at Truthhound, or at thetruthhound.com, that other blog, thetruthhound.com. I have this article posted. But the updated Trilateral report says things like the U.S. presidential campaign, this is going back to before the election, featured a wide array of views on U.S.-Russia relations, and a return to deep engagement between Russia and the West will not be feasible so long as Russia's global ambitions and grand strategy remain unchanged. And you guys are aware, of course, of this Marshall Plan, this revised Marshall Plan outfit that's taken shape recently, addressing the same views as the Trilateral Commission, that if only Russia would straighten up, if only they would get with the program and stop being this manipulative cyber attacker, election manipulator, then the West could finally reach some sort of détente with Russia, with Putin's Russia, and finally we could have peace and free trade and wonderful relations.
So in other words, join our club.
Yeah, Russia's not allowed to have a sovereign viewpoint, to act in its own national self-interest. Everything has to be measured on the West's terms, as you guys well know. And this, to put it briefly for in the interest of brevity, this is the point behind this revised trilateral report.
Yeah.
That Russia has to meet Western standards. There cannot be any meeting in the middle, and at the same time, they're trying to continually wean Europe off of energy dependency on Russia, so Europe doesn't have to rely on Russia for natural gas and things like that. And then they can further apply sanctions against Russia and isolate Russia. And so naturally, it follows that all the trilateral people in the media, like Richard Haass, who's a trilateral member, and head of the Council on Foreign Relations, he has a op-ed column in a number of publications. And you have a trilateral columnist for the Washington Post, and you have a number of trilateral Bilderberg-related and CFR people as media hosts, as columnists, as guest pundits, plus their own publications that are pumping this anti-Russian meme that then makes its way into the media to financially and politically hamstring Russia continually. So much of what you see within the anti-Trump thing is born through this trilateral network.
Yeah.
And it's just the long-term planning that becomes day-by-day manipulation.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Well, of course, all of those people, immensely powerful. We never really read much about them in the press, whether it's the Bilderbergers or the Trilateral Commission. But what you're pointing out there, Mark, is these are the people really driving the political agenda. What do we, the public, see? Well, we see this type of material. And of course, this is all based on the fact that those nasty Russians are out to murder us all in our beds. So we've got the sea trials of Britain's only and latest aircraft carrier, Queen Elizabeth. I keep wanting to add the second after that, Queen Elizabeth II. And we've got Michael Fallon on board alongside. Yes, the man on Fallon's left is the captain of HMS Queen Elizabeth. I have to say, Mike, that I have never, ever seen such a scruffy Royal Navy uniform.
Where's his baseball cap?
Well, he's left his baseball cap back in his cabin, I presume. But I look at it, he's got his rank hanging round his neck. He looks as though he could move straight across into the McDonald's foyer, sweeping the floor, because I don't think they'd put him behind the counter serving the buns. This is deliberate. This has been another deliberate attack on the military, which is massive change program and really sending them where I think it's astonishing. And you contrast it with the swagger of Michael Fallon. When I saw his body position there, this reminds me of Tony Blair swaggering along. He's got the smirk on his face. And this is all because we now have one aircraft carrier at sea. But the tragic thing is, Mike, of course, there are no aircraft.
No.
So no aircraft on the aircraft carrier. We have no maritime patrol aircraft. We have shortly, we'll have no surface-to-surface missiles. We will shortly have no air-to-surface missiles from the helicopters. But Michael Fallon getting very excited that this massive carrier is now at sea. So these are some of the things he's been saying, and I decided to label them as ridiculous statements. He's told armchair critics of the £3 billion warship to shut up for a while. As he said, the aircraft carrier will improve Britain's military and humanitarian prowess for generations to come. So the Daily Mail correspondent who wrote the story for this particular image said that he was looking over the edge. I think it should be over the side, but he was looking over the edge. But apparently this huge ship is for humanitarian aid, according to the article in the Mail.
Well, since it doesn't have any aircraft, I suppose it could carry some boxes.
It could carry some boxes. He said the ship is much bigger than Illustrious. Well, I'm glad he's told us that. And it combines, of course, sea power with air power. So just in case you were a little unsure as to what aircraft carriers did, they combine sea power with air power.
Good.
Okay. Already we have 10 F-35s being flown and trained in the United States. So the Americans are training their aircraft, which I think is very good. By the end of this year, we'll have 14 of those fast jets, the world's most sophisticated fighter. So I hope you're paying attention to this, Mark, because we're getting very excited. We might, at some stage in the future, have 14 aircraft available. And as we're going to see, Michael Fallon says this is clearly enough to dominate the world.
Excellent.
So let's move on. HMS Illustrious has gone. Well, absolutely right, cut up as a result of Tory policy. But Queen Elizabeth, the biggest and greatest warship this country has ever built, will go on now from these trials to defend our country, safeguard our sea lanes, to work with other allies and partners to keep the peace and to save lives across all 7 seas. This man has been reading the same Enid Blyton book of piracy and military matters. It's astonishing. If you look at the language, this aircraft carrier, if we say average sea conditions, is going to be moving around at about 14 knots. Is apparently
no.
I'll come on to that. Is apparently going to be able to police the whole world.
Yeah,
the whole world. I know where you're coming on the speed. He says our carrier program is a clear demonstration of British power and commitment to our global standing. With 2 aircraft carriers, we will have 1 available at all time, providing a world-class carrier strike capability. The magnificent HMS Queen Elizabeth provides us with power on a scale we've never seen before. This is an aircraft carrier. It is a single aircraft carrier, Mike. It can only be in one place at one time. And this man is talking as though we've launched a whole battle fleet.
He's off his head.
He is off his head, absolutely off his head. So we just thought we'd bring up a couple of points. 1 aircraft carrier will not project sea power worldwide. And when it's sunk, it's sunk. If you've only got 1 and it's heavily damaged or it's sunk, it's gone. An aircraft carrier preferably needs aircraft. We don't seem to have those. The Navy itself is too small to defend this carrier properly, and that is why they're constantly talking about the need to stay involved with the European Union. The previous aircraft carriers, Invincible, Illustrious and Ark Royal, were in fact anti-submarine specialist units, and their job was to help protect US aircraft carriers. So we've now got an aircraft carrier, but we don't have that anti-submarine protection. This is absolute madness by these people, and I don't know how it's justified, really. What would you like to say about speed?
Oh well, Brian, because they announced today that the aircraft carrier in its sea trials had exceeded the stated maximum speed on paper maximum speed during sea trials.
Right.
But of course, it's got nothing on board.
It's still light load.
Yes.
Well, they might have made allowances for that. We could be kind and say they've made allowances. But I think what's going on is that they are desperate now to convince the public that 6.5 billion has been well spent on 2 aircraft carriers with no aircraft. And they're going to do everything they can to big it up. The reporting by the Mail was quite appalling. I won't go into it. But let's remind ourselves that it was the British government that sold off 72 Harriers to the Americans. You've got those tucked away in your shed somewhere, Mark Anderson. We know because the government sold them to the US. And this was fraud. Obviously, these were working aircraft that were sold on for a fraction of their true value. And then we have this sort of statement, also reported by the Mail, about Fallon. He said, I think the Russians will look at this ship, Queen Elizabeth, with a little bit of envy. And I'm just going to say here, I think the Russians are laughing their socks off at the ignorance and stupidity of this man, who is a specialist in children's nurseries. I don't know whether any of this is being reported in the States, Mark, but I can imagine amongst US Navy carrier specialists, they're going to be gently smiling.
Well, actually, before we ask Mark for comment, what is the tonnage of the Queen Elizabeth?
About 65,000.
65,000. So that's about 2/3 the size of the US's new carrier, Mark,
which should be carrying close to 100 aircraft.
Yeah.
And at the moment, we think the Queen Elizabeth may have 12 aircraft.
Well, you guys are throwing me a curveball here. Yeah, the U.S. military supposedly is going to be rebuilt under Donald Trump, and word has it that he's adding at least 50 billion to the pot of already what is the largest military in the history of mankind. Back in the 1940s, if you guys want to talk about it today, we sent a lot of military materiel and much else to Soviet Russia under Lend-Lease. If you want to talk about real Russian collusion today or another day, maybe we'll get to that. But the U.S. military apparently has reached a low in terms of preparedness, or at least a relative low in its own terms. But now we're told it's being rebuilt. We do send a lot of F-35s to Israel under the 4.2 billion or so that they get in foreign aid every year, which the U.S. government has to borrow to pay. And we pay interest in order to pay that in one lump sum, Israel being the only foreign aid recipient that gets all their money in one lump sum rather than installments. So there is some stress on the U.S. military and military production and trade and arms exports and things like that in that regard with the Israeli state. But overall, yeah, compared to Great Britain, the U.S. Navy is really quite well prepared. But you guys have obviously been depleted because, as you've outlined, you're being made part of the European military apparatus. You're no longer your own military, but you have the bare minimum you need to be part of the European army, and that appears to be the main reason why you're in that shape. Why you don't have planes on your aircraft carriers, and why your overall readiness is so low. That evidently that's the case. So.
Spot on, I think, Mark. Thank you for that.
Okay, let's move on to financial matters, Brian. And, although most people in the mainstream media try to claim that the financial crisis is over, and some, including the head of the Fed, Janet Yellen here, this is from some time ago, would have us believe that there will not be any further financial crisis during our lifetimes. Well, in fact, in Italy, the banking crisis never went away. In fact, nowhere the banking crisis has gone away, but we're particularly seeing it in Italy at the moment. They've had 3 major bank bailouts combined with some bail-ins for savers over the last period, and they are trying to raise money that they can't raise in order to try to prevent continuing collapse. Now, back in October, Mark Carnage, the Governor of the Bank of England, asked the Prudential Regulation Authority to work out what the UK's exposure to the Italian banking crisis would be. And by the beginning of last week, when he was in Parliament to report, he had nothing but waffle, really. So what he said was, waffle, 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 everything is fine, waffle, 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 limited exposure, waffle, waffle, all under control. That was his message. So that's what he had to say. So in other words, we are in deep trouble. And in the meantime, as we reported yesterday, we've got the danger to the banking system of the fact that shipping companies can't pay off loans that they took out for ships that they can't sail because there isn't enough global trade going on. The Bank of England today has said or yesterday rather, has reported a further danger to the banks, that of rising consumer debt levels. So they have told banks, credit card companies and car loan providers that they risk fresh action. I haven't seen the Bank of England really take any action against any of these people, but they're risking fresh action apparently against reckless lending, as they describe it, and they warned of a spiral of complacency over consumer debt. And so what the speech from the Bank of England said was, household debt, like most things that are good in moderation, can be dangerous in excess. This was Alex Brazier, who's the head of the Director of Financial Stability, and he was speaking in Liverpool. And he said, dangerous to borrowers, dangerous to lenders, and most importantly, from our perspective, everyone else in the economy. What he means is everyone else in the financial system. Lenders have been lucky beneficiaries of the benign way the economy has evolved, he said. In expanding the supply of credit, they may be placing undue weight on the recent performance of credit cards and loans in benign conditions. Lenders have not entered but they may be dicing with the spiral of complacency. The spiral continues, and as borrowers rack up more and more debt, lending standards can go from responsible to reckless very quickly. The sorry fact is that as lenders think the risks they face are falling, the risks they and the wider economy face are actually growing. And again, when he talks about economy, he means financial system. Well, look, let's just remind ourselves of the real situation. And as far as I'm aware, it's only us that are highlighting this particular situation.
UK column, you mean?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, absolutely. Because UK outstanding debt, everybody talks about national debt, and they're talking, when they say national debt, they mean government debt. But government debt is a pretty small piece of the pie here, because the banking sector, household debt, corporate debt, these parts of the pie are all at least the same size, if not bigger. And of course, even if you take out this big black hole of money, which we have an obligation to pay under the state pension system, the outstanding debt for the UK as a whole is huge. Well, at last, a US-based outlet is pointing this out, at least as far as the United States situation is concerned. So this is goldseek.com, and the article is written by David Chapman. It's called "The Elephant in the Room: Debt." And he's making the point that if you take the total debt in the US economy, household, business and government debt, that has now reached 375% of GDP. If we just go back to this one for a second, I'm including state pensions obligations in this. Britain actually has 756% of GDP debt obligations.
On that basis, we should be considered bankrupt in a worse way to, say, Greece, for example,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So on a world stage, we're preaching about what other countries should do financially. But at home, of course, hypocrisy rules, and we are also bankrupt.
Absolutely. And, this is not being discussed in the media. Why not? Well, the media, let's talk about them for a second. Here's a nice little article on BBC Trending, Brian. It's called "The Communist Soldier Using Charity Sites to Fund His War." Of course, the article isn't about one person at all. It's actually about a number of people. And it says charity donation websites often used to support victims of violence are being employed by a number of Westerners to finance their personal war efforts. And so the beginning of this implies is that this is something to do with war. But actually, as you read on, you discover it's nothing to do with war at all. It's actually about people who choose to fund their own independent journalism through crowdfunding. And so they highlight a couple of people, one called Russell Bentley, a Texas native who they say describes himself as a pro-Russian communist. And they say from the start, Bentley has relied on crowdfunding websites to finance his exploits. Crowdfunding websites such as GoFundMe, Just Giving and Indiegogo are typically used for charitable purposes, including to raise money for victims of tragedies. And then it goes on to highlight another guy, a British guy called Graham Phillips. And they say among them is a 38-year-old Graham Phillips from Nottingham in the UK. Since November 2013, he has been covering the conflict in Ukraine, broadcasting amateur videos, so they're disparaging about that as well, from Donbass, often in the midst of tearing bullets and toppling buildings. His daredevil style has drawn the attention of audiences, and he boasts 86,000 subscribers on YouTube. From 2014 to 15, Phillips was employed by Zvezda, a media channel run by the Russian Military of Defense, and he also freelanced for the state-operated TV channel RT. Phillips is highly critical of the Ukrainian government and appears to back the breakup of the country, and so on. And so it goes on, and really what it is a hit piece on independent journalists raising their own money and financing their own independent journalism. And so, sorry, just before you comment, Brian, if I just want to highlight this because this is from Graham Phillips. His website is called The Truth Speakers. The Truth Speaker, and the article is called BBC Hit Piece and My Response to It. Please read it, because he goes into quite a bit of detail about the allegations the BBC has made, particularly this allegation that he was employed by Zvezda, which they say is a media channel run by the Ministry of Defense in Russia. And as he makes the point in his article here, he actually resigned from that organization for various reasons. but do read his explanation for the, or at least his response to the allegations that the BBC is making. Brian, this is a disgrace.
Well, it's a disgrace, and one of the biggest reasons for that, of course, is the BBC's correspondent, whoever it was only able to write the article because they are funded by the money which is bullied out of the public in the licence fee. So this is despicable BBC reporting, and of course the BBC doesn't comment on its own charity, BBC Media Action, that boasts of training journalists to operate in other countries to help destabilise their own governments, of which Syria was one of the biggest examples with BBC Media Action. So total hypocrisy.
Yeah. Okay, Mark, let's move back to the United States for a second. And we're running out of time here, Mark, so please, very brief on this. But this is Virginia Governor McAuliffe. Am I right in thinking, if just briefly read this article from you, Mark, am I right in believing that he is already considering launching a presidential campaign?
Yeah, no sooner did he attend Bilderberg in Virginia, in his home state, this one-term Virginia governor. No sooner did he leave Chantilly, Virginia, after attending Bilderberg, then he announced that he's seeking the presidency, although he said it with a degree of tentativeness, a somewhat tentative announcement. But what we find out here is we have kind of a Bill Clinton 2.0, Terry McAuliffe, governor of Virginia, the 72nd governor of Virginia, having attended Bilderberg, just like Bill Clinton did in Baden-Baden, Germany in 1991. And the very next year, Bill Clinton, Slick Willie as he was known, became president. Now, we can't always say that correlation means causation. We can't say with utter ironclad certainty that Terry McAuliffe is getting the coveted Bilderberg boost, but his CV, his resume, his pedigree, what I'm saying in this article, fits the Bilderberg mold to a T, just as Bill Clinton did back in the early 90s. So this is something to watch. This is a person to watch. There's a lot of corruption here. This guy talks to Bill Clinton on a daily basis. He's not just a casual pal, but a very close pal of both of the Clintons. And what I'm basically issuing here is kind of a warning shot that here comes another would-be Bilderberg presidential candidate following the exact same mold as Clinton, friends with the Clintons, and it deserves a very close watch early on, since he's already hinting he wants to seek the presidency. He wants to help get more discredited Democrats back into the U.S. Congress, where they've been kicked out in the Trump revolution. And this is in the 2018 midterm elections that he wants to do this, to get more Democrats back into Congress, get more people like him in the governor's seats, establish some beachheads in terms of financing. This guy's a very accomplished businessman, a very good fundraiser. He's already raised millions for both of the Clintons. He was Hillary Clinton's campaign manager in 2008. He's head of the current National Governors Association. This guy's got all the pips and stripes on his uniform that the Bilderbergers and the Trilaterals want. He also took part in the Clinton Foundation. So this guy, now 60 years old, who has his hand in banking, who helped guarantee the Clintons' mortgage when they were in trouble in the 1990s in New York, he bears watching. He's already scandal-ridden to a point, and he's aiming high with Bilderberg backing, or at least their nod, at least their green light. And so it's very important we pay attention early on to what may be coming. And concerned citizens in the U.S. and really everywhere might want to head this off at the pass, spread the word, and help defeat this effort to get another Clinton-like person in the White House.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Well, it doesn't matter whether it's in the US or UK. You don't have to dig far into politics to come across the subject of child abuse. And I just wanted to end on that note here. We'll remind people of a couple of weeks ago, we reported on the Jersey child abuse report, which had come out. It was clearly a whitewash. We said, well done, job done. We have been warning about this one. 239 refugee children disappear in the UK. Nobody is interested, least of all Tim Farron, thank you, Mike. So we know that wherever the abuse of children is happening, members of the British and American governments are going to be fairly close. Some people find it difficult to imagine that there's collaboration between authorities. We say, well, you've only got to look at who's involved in child sexual abuse. Here we've got a former policeman reported in our local paper. And of course, he was also involved with child protection. But look at what the judge says. I've asked myself how you could sink so low, you who were a child protection police officer. So the evidence is there in the open that people who should be protecting children are clearly unsuitable. The judge went on to say he couldn't really punish this man. This was in a previous case. The man's come up with a new set of charges, but the judge had said that no greater punishment can be passed by me than for you to see a mugshot of yourself on the front page of the local paper. So according to the judge, the correct sentence for this type of offence is that you should simply appear in the paper. It's nice, isn't it?
Yeah.
So where are we going? We just wanted to come on to this. We've been reporting that refugee children in Sheffield have been particularly vulnerable. And we've pointed out that Sheffield, as with many other major cities in UK, are now signed up to be cities of sanctuary, where they're boasting they're protecting refugee and immigrant children. We say the opposite is happening. And today we want to say that we now have irrefutable evidence that John Mothersole, the Chief Executive of Sheffield City Council, is fully aware of this ongoing abuse of refugee children in Sheffield, but he is doing absolutely nothing to stop it or bring the perpetrators to justice. Remember that this man is a common purpose leader, heavily involved at the highest level. And if you take a little look at Common Purpose, we were fascinated to see today that a gentleman called David Robertson has been appointed chair of the Common Purpose UK, and he's also on the charity trustees. So what is his claim to fame? Sorry, that should be global president. He's global president or ex-global president of swimming trunk manufacturer Speedo. And now his job is to train world leaders to lead outside authority. You couldn't make this stuff up. Why do we always mention Common Purpose when we mention child abuse? Well, remember, of course, that two deeply sinister paedophiles, Matthew Burns and James Rennie, were Common Purpose graduates, Common Purpose leaders, and of course they were found guilty of heinous crimes. Nobody knows what they were doing within the Common Purpose networks and its ability to get into schools and amongst school children.
But we do know that Matthew Byrne was on the
Merseyside advisory group, yes. So he was helping to recruit other Common Purpose leaders. So as we look at the fraud and corruption, which is alongside all of the Western governments, alongside power and big money, is always the subject of child abuse. And we're going to end our news once again by saying that child abuse is the fuel of the British government in Westminster. We'll leave it there. Thanks very much for joining us, Mark. And I'd like to say a very big thank you to the people who've been thanking us. It really is a huge boost to be told in person or via email or the telephone that people do appreciate the news we're putting out. And I'm going to say thank you for those words of encouragement. They do make the job worthwhile. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.